When you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Chris Wallace found one honest representative of the Obama administration, their former, the president's former Homeland Security Secretary, Jay Johnson, who was on Fox News Sunday, and owned the policy that was extended into the Trump administration until last week's executive order.
Without a doubt, the images and the reality from 2014, just like 2018, are not pretty. And so we expanded family detention. We had then 34,000 beds for family detention, only 95 of 34,000 equipped to deal with families. So we expanded it. I freely admit it was controversial. We believed it was necessary at the time. I still believe it is necessary to maintain a certain capability for families. We can't have catch and release. And in my 3 years, we deported or repatriated or returned over 1 million people.
They went on to have a conversation about catch and release more specifically, with Chris Wallace laying out the data and Jay Johnson saying, yeah, catch and release doesn't work. And, here's the problem. So here's the problem. They set up the problem, and now, you, President, Congress, go try and solve it because it's complicated.
The practical result of the program that the Obama administration put in was that you had to release. You caught and had to release some of the people with a promise and sometimes an ankle bracelet that they would come back. I want to put up some numbers on the screen because according to government numbers, 74% of those who were released showed up for their hearings last year. But that still left almost 40,000 people who didn't show up for deportation hearings. So catch and release, which is what the practical effect was under the Obama administration and until this year for the Trump administration, that doesn't really work either, does it?
Well, without a doubt, it's a problem, Chris, which is one of the reasons we expanded family detention, which was controversial. A lot of people
was knocked down by the court. That's the reason we got this 20-day ruling. It was because of the Obama administration's policy.
Well, we expanded family detention, and then we ran into the issue of the Flores case, which you mentioned a moment ago. I disagreed then with the ruling in the Flores case because I think that our Border Patrol and our immigration enforcement people need those tools available to deal with situations like this. But it's a sheer matter of numbers, Chris. Right now, we have family detention capability for about 3,000 or 4,000 people, and you've got over 1,000 migrants crossing the border a day in Central America. And so even if you emptied it out completely today, it would fill back up in a matter of days.
Right. So there's the law, and there's the infrastructure, and there's the influx. Go. Solve it. And frankly, if Jay Johnson was House Minority Leader, Senate Minority Leader, perhaps you could get a deal with Democrats. If Jay Johnson was running a large media organization, perhaps you would have at least a couple of big outlets that weren't fanning the flames of hysteria, that were actually informing people so you could have an intelligent, substantive discussion about that, which has been largely absent.
And I wish the Democrats had an appetite to do something about immigration.
Yeah, they are going to do something. They're going to demagogue it and try to score political points for the purposes of retaking the House. That's what they're going to try and do. It was interesting, this sort of surprising statement coming out of Hollywood. Twin Peaks creator David Lynch saying Trump could go down as one of the greatest presidents in history because he has disrupted the thing so much, referring to the political establishment. No one is able to counter this guy in an intelligent way, said Lynch, who, by the way, voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary. So it's not like he's a conservative necessarily, but he sees sort of what's happening and perhaps how the left is overplaying their hand with nonsense. For more on these and other topics, we're pleased to be joined by another Hollywood star, Andrew Klavan, screenwriter, essayist, author of the book The Great Good Thing, A Secular Jew Comes to Faith in Christ. Andrew, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Well, how did you react to David Lynch's rather surprising comments, at least surprising to me?
Well, I think this is actually filtering through, that is Donald Trump, for the first time in a long time, stands up to this media onslaught. Some of his ideas and some of the things that conservatives represent as told by him are getting through. We know that the system has been broken. We saw last week Chuck Schumer shaking a pen at reporters and basically begging Donald Trump to make law from the executive branch because he basically doesn't want lawmakers to be making laws. I think that Congress has been stuck on this immigration thing for so long that it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to have Congress begging the president to rule by executive order instead of taking on these difficult issues and compromising and coming to an answer. So I think a lot of people look. What the press has been doing this last week is their old playbook. We saw this years ago against George W. Bush with Katrina, where years of corrupt Democrat governance in New Orleans resulted in a disaster during a hurricane, and it was blamed on George W. Bush. And we all remember Kanye West saying George W. Bush doesn't care about black people, and the press standing in stadiums and blaming him for all the blaming Bush for all the things that had resulted from the hurricane that had nothing to do with him. Now we see the same playbook here. We see crying babies, and it doesn't matter where the crying babies come from. If they can find a crying baby, they tell you it's Trump's fault, whereas you just played, this policy has been in place for a long time, and it's been Congress's fault for not dealing with it. So the big difference here, the only difference we're really seeing is when the hysteria is ramped up, when the crying babies are put in front of the camera, when the charges of racism are screamed, instead of backing down, Trump stands up to them and goes on the offensive. And it's actually been pretty remarkable. It's, the polls are sort of showing that Trump has got the people's ear. They're listening. They're saying, well, yeah, we can't have open borders. We do have to do something about it. And it is with the legislative branch to pass law. That's why they call them legislators.
But I think it touched a lot of our heartstrings, as moms, when we saw kids being separated from their parents. Like, how did a mom end up in a jail in Seattle and her son end up at a shelter in New York? Now, I know some were put with family members who are in different states, but some aren't. I mean, they're sent to different shelters.
Yeah, well, Abraham Lincoln said the best way to get rid of a bad law is to enforce it. And I think when you have Chuck Schumer accusing the president of enforcing the law, which is essentially what he's doing, he's saying that if you break the law by coming into this country, which is a misdemeanor the first time you do it and a felony the second time you do it, you're going to be incarcerated. A judge's ruling is that you cannot keep children incarcerated with their parents for longer than a certain period of time, so ultimately they get separated. That's not Trump's fault. I mean, I agree with you, Amy. I think that it's terrible that this is happening. That we need good, compassionate, intelligent immigration law. Law comes out of Congress. That's what their job is. They are the lawmakers. Trump's only job is to execute the law. That's why it's called the executive branch. He's doing that, and it is showing that this law is broken. And I agree with you. The law is broken. But this idea that somehow this is the fault of heartless Republicans, that it's the fault of evil Donald Trump, it's the fault of a Congress which has been sitting on its hands for now 20 years, refusing to deal with this because they don't know how to face their constituents. They haven't got the courage to do their jobs. And I just think that, if all these screaming reporters were standing outside the Capitol and screaming at legislators and saying, hey, when are you going to do your job, instead of this Trump hatred, which is all they've got and something they've been using against Republicans since forever, since Reagan. If they would do their jobs and actually research how our laws are supposed to be made, how our government works, how it's not Donald Trump's fault for enforcing the law, it's the legislators for making bad law. They've got to change it. They've got to change it. And look, I don't want to see these children separated either. This is not a matter of pounding the table and saying, forget the children. It's a question of how we make law in this country. This is supposed to be a nation of laws, not a nation of presidents who sign things and issue executive orders like Obama. We don't want a king fixing this. We want our Congress fixing it. And
we don't want a mob driving decision-making. And, of course, we've seen some mob action over the last week, shaming and driving Kristen Nielsen, Homeland Secretary, out of a restaurant. Seth Rogen celebrating that he refused to take a picture with Paul Ryan's kids. And then, obviously, what happened with Pam Bondi at a theater in Florida over the weekend. And then Sarah Huckabee Sanders, most notably, at this restaurant in Virginia. Dan Hannan, a former British MEP, writes in the Washington Examiner, the worst thing is not the mob, it's the cowardice that we display before the mob. And he essentially argues that the cowardice has been exacerbated by social media. The internet didn't create a problem, but since you can be a a anonymous internet cowboy, it's exacerbating the cowardice and the mobocracy. Do you agree with that? Share his concern?
Of course I do. I mean, it's amazing to me that all we've heard about is the authoritarian Trump, what an evil authoritarian Donald Trump is. And I keep saying to people, if you show me one thing that he has done that is authoritarian, where he has broken the norms of American governance, I will stand opposed to that action. But they can't cite anything where, meanwhile, when they don't get their way, they take to the streets and become mobs. I mean, we saw at Starbucks when two trespassers refused to purchase anything and then defied the police and were arrested. Suddenly, all of Starbucks had to shut down to take sensitivity training. Well, I would like the people at the Red Hen restaurant who threw Sarah Sanders out, I would like them to take some sensitivity training about how to treat people who disagree with you. I mean, this is showing the left. If Donald Trump is doing one thing better than anything else, it is showing us who the left is. They really are not at peace with American governance. They're really not at peace with being answerable to the people. They're not at peace with being answerable to the process. They only want what they want, and if they don't get it, they take to their media and they take to the streets and they start committing acts of violence and cruelty. And you know, when I hear these guys, they can't even express an opinion without using the F word. They can't even express their point of view in a rational, measured way without cursing at people. And listen, I have hit Trump repeatedly for his rudeness and his bullying and his, obstreperous way of talking. But who can blame him at this point when he is facing an entire movement full of bullies?
Maybe we
we
just need to lower our expectations of Ivy League English lit majors.
I think it would be nice if they taught them a couple of extra words besides the four-letter ones.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew Klavan, has anybody treated you differently because of your political standings?
Oh.
Well, I mean, I basically have been shut out of Hollywood in a lot of ways, and I get a lot of this stuff, and it's very difficult for me to work in my profession and actually get work anymore because I am so openly conservative and openly, and express my opinions. The idea is this happens to me all the time. I will walk into a studio, I'll walk into some filmmakers, and somebody will come up to me and drop his voice and say, I agree with you, in a whisper. And I always say the same thing. Why are we whispering? We are right. We are in the right. We are standing up for the American traditions and the Constitution. I'm not going to whisper it, but yes, you pay a price for it. I mean, there are a lot of people in this town who come up to me, mostly guys in lower-level positions like waiters and drivers who turn around and recognize me and tell me that they agree with me. But this is a town where if you speak up, you pay a price.
Well, that's the thing. It's not only that we're right, it's that even if you don't think we're right, why should we whisper? We wouldn't expect you to whisper. We just
right.
state it straight away.
Not only do we not expect them to whisper, they feel that they have a right to tell us what words we can use, how we can look at things, how we feel about things, and that to say what we say is somehow inherently rude and unkind and racist. And they don't understand they've been insulting us for years, calling us racist, calling men pigs. And when we snap back and send a guy like Trump to send these messages back to them, they suddenly feel that they're not being treated right. Well, they're being treated exactly the way they've treated other people for a long, long time.
He is Hollywood screenwriter Andrew Klavan of such great books and films like True Crime. Essayist, also the author of a book you should pick up, The Great Good Thing, A Secular Jew Comes to Faith in Christ. Andrew, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
And you joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.